everybody. Welcome in. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be digging into something pretty fascinating. A blog post, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's from a website called Vox Populi.
Okay.
And the post is called Removing the Obstructions.
Interesting title.
Yeah, and it's by a guy named Karl Denninger. And Denninger, he lays out this legal tactic, this strategy that he thinks the Trump administration should be using. Yeah. And it really gets into some interesting questions about how legal strategy can be used to really impact big picture policy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about how you can use, I guess you could say, sort of obscure legal procedures to try and shift the balance of power a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. Between the federal government and states in this case.
Yeah.
So to get into this, we need to talk about this thing called preliminary injunctions.
Right.
Have you ever heard of a preliminary injunction?
Yeah. I mean, it's when a court steps in and says, all right, hold on, stop. You can't do that right now. We need to figure this out.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like a pause button, right? Yeah. On maybe like a new law or regulation until, the court can kind of figure out if it's kosher, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Denninger points out this really interesting detail about these injunctions.
Mm-hmm.
He says that most of the time, if you want to get one of these injunctions, you have to put up what's called a security bond.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, have you ever
I've heard of that?
Yeah, so think of it like insurance, right?
Okay.
You're basically saying, look, if it turns out that I was wrong and this injunction shouldn't have been issued, then, here's some money to cover any costs or damages.
Right.
The really interesting thing that Denninger points out is that the U.S. government is actually exempt from this rule.
Oh.
But states are not.
Okay.
And Denninger is really emphasizing here, we're not talking about like chump change here.
Right.
He's saying these bonds, especially when you're talking about like nationwide injunctions, could easily be millions.
Wow.
Even billions of dollars.
Oh. Okay.
So now here's where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
Denninger is saying that the Trump administration should start demanding these bonds from states that are trying to block federal actions in court.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty clear kind of strategic play here, right?
Yeah.
If states suddenly have to come up with millions or billions of dollars just to even start a lawsuit, that's a big deterrent, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it kind of changes the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, it's like a huge entry fee, right?
Yeah, yes.
To even get into the game. Yeah. And it makes you, wonder, would states be as quick to challenge these federal actions if they knew they had to put up this kind of money up front?
I mean, imagine if like California had to put up billions of dollars to challenge like a federal immigration policy or something like that.
It would be a game changer for sure.
It would totally change the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Denninger even goes a step further. He's like, this could also be a way to uncover fraudulent payments.
Right. Oh, interesting.
So, maybe some states are getting money that they shouldn't be. And then if that's the case, then the bond requirement would be even higher. Right. So it's not just about sort of the upfront cost of the lawsuit. Yeah. It's also about potential accountability too.
It's about making sure that everything's on the up and up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And this whole thing, it really makes you wonder, why isn't the Trump administration already doing this?
Right. Denninger even asks that in the blog post.
Yeah.
He's like, are they unaware of this?
Yeah.
Or are they like intentionally choosing not to use it?
Right. Like what's the strategy there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right?
It is.
What are their motivations?
Yeah.
And it's not even just about the Trump administration, right?
Yeah.
Any presidential administration could potentially use this strategy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're a president who's butting heads with states that you think are overstepping their bounds, this could be a really powerful tool in your arsenal.
It's really interesting to think about the broader implications of this, right?
Yeah.
Denninger wraps up his post. He actually ends by saying, let's discuss this further on SG.
Oh, SG.
And I'm not really familiar with SG. Do you know what that is?
Oh, yeah. SG, it's basically an online forum. It tends to attract kind of a libertarian leaning crowd.
I'm interested.
Yeah, folks who are really into limited government, state autonomy, individual liberty, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so Denninger probably directed people there because he figures, the audience is going to be really receptive to this kind of legal strategy.
Yeah, I see. So he's not just presenting this argument. He's kind of like trying to get people to...
He's trying to mobilize people, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Get people talking, get people debating.
It's really interesting, yeah.
And maybe even get people to push for this to actually be implemented,
Actually put it into action, yeah.
So that brings us to a question for you, the listener,
Right.
What do you think about this?
Yeah.
Is this a clever way to kind of reassert federal power?
Yeah.
Or is it a dangerous overreach?
Right. That's a really good question.
It's something to think about.
It is something to think about.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
It really is. And this is something that could have ripple effects across a lot of different policy areas.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, think about something like environmental regulations.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Let's say a state wants to implement stricter environmental rules than what the federal government has.
Right.
The federal government, under this strategy, could use this bond requirement to make it much harder for the state to actually enforce those stricter rules.
Wow. So it's not even just about blocking state actions.
Right.
It's also about potentially shaping policy at the state level.
Exactly. Yeah. And this could play out in all sorts of areas, healthcare, education, gun control.
Wow.
It really raises these questions about how this kind of tactic could influence that balance of power between the federal government and the states.
Yeah. And it makes you think about the potential unintended consequences too, right?
No, it's could this lead to a situation where states are just less likely to try new things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Less likely to experiment with innovative policies.
Right, because they're afraid of getting into this big legal battle.
Yeah, exactly. It could stifle progress in some areas, potentially.
It could, yeah. And then on the flip side of that, does this mean the federal government might get, more heavy-handed, knowing that the states have a harder time pushing back?
Right. It's a really complicated issue.
It is. Yeah. There's no easy answers here.
No, definitely not. And Denninger seems to be pretty confident that this is a good thing.
Well, he's writing from a particular perspective, right?
Right.
He's he's directing this argument towards this specific audience on that SG platform, a group that tends to favor, limited government.
Yeah.
More state autonomy.
Right. So, he probably sees this as a way to kind of rein in what he sees as federal overreach.
I see.
And for folks who share that viewpoint, this legal tactic might seem like a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that there are other perspectives out there, right?
Right, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are legal scholars, policymakers from all across the political spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who would have all sorts of different opinions about this.
For sure. I mean, some might say this undermines the whole principle of federalism.
Right.
The idea that states can be these laboratories of democracy.
Right. Try out different things.
Yeah, experiment with different approaches. Yeah. And others might say, well, this is necessary to prevent states from blocking important federal policies.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a really
It's a debate. It's a debate that really gets to the heart of how power is shared in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, this deep dive is really making me realize how much I hadn't thought about this.
Right.
It's like we've peeled back a layer of the onion here.
Yeah.
And it's a whole new level of complexity.
Yeah, that's the beauty of these deep dives, right?
It is.
It's about going beyond the surface and grappling with the nuances of these issues. We're not just here to give you information. We're trying to help you develop a more sophisticated understanding of how things work.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And in this case, the world of legal strategy is pretty fascinating.
It really is. Yeah. More intriguing than I thought it would be.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds you that the law is not just this dry set of rules. It's a real force, that shapes people's lives. It shapes the course of history.
Absolutely. It does. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, are there other hidden legal gems like this out there?
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
The law is constantly evolving.
Right.
And creative legal minds are always finding new ways to use these things.
I guess so, yeah.
Denninger seems to have found one.
He does.
With this bond requirement.
Yeah.
Whether or not this actually gets implemented
right.
by the Trump administration or any administration for that matter.
Right.
That's still an open question.
It is a good question, yeah.
It's one worth thinking about though, right?
Yeah.
Because if this does start to gain traction,
yeah,
it could have a really profound impact on that relationship between the federal government and the states.
I see, yeah.
Potentially reshaping the whole fabric of our federalist system.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's almost like Denninger's throwing down this gauntlet, right?
He is.
He's challenging us to think really critically about how power is balanced in our government.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating about it is, he's not just making an academic argument. He's actually trying to influence, the political landscape.
That's right.
By bringing this to the attention of this specific online community.
Yeah.
He's trying to get people talking about this.
Right.
Maybe even start a movement.
Yeah, exactly.
That could lead to real world change.
It's really interesting to think about, the power of ideas.
Right. Especially
when they're, presented in a way that really gets people thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, this whole deep dive has really been an eye-opener for me.
Good.
It's made me realize how much I just kind of took for granted about how our government works.
That's why we do these, right?
That's great, yeah.
It's about challenging assumptions.
Yeah.
Stimulating that critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And empowering you, the listener, to really engage with these complex issues in a more, informed and nuanced way.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love that. So what do you say? We kind of switch gears a little bit here and maybe explore some of the historical precedents for this kind of legal tactic.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, just to kind of see how this kind of strategy has been used in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this whole tension between federal power and state power.
Right.
It's as old as the country itself, really.
Yeah, that's true.
We've seen it play out in so many legal battles over the years. And this bond requirement that we're talking about, you could almost see it as just the latest chapter in this ongoing saga.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any specific examples that come to mind?
Well, one that I always think about is the civil rights era.
Oh, interesting.
Back then you had all these southern states that were really resisting those federal desegregation laws.
Right.
They were using all sorts of legal tactics to try to, delay or obstruct the process.
So you're thinking that if this bond requirement had been around back then, it might have actually sped things up.
It's possible, right? I mean, imagine if those states had known that they'd have to put up a bunch of money every time they challenged one of these federal desegregation orders.
Yeah.
It might have made them think twice.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, to think about how this one legal tactic could have potentially changed the course of history.
It's pretty wild. And it's not just about the past either, right?
Right.
I mean, think about what's going on right now with issues like immigration or environmental policy.
Right.
We're seeing states challenging federal actions in court all the time.
Yeah, all of the time.
And this bond requirement could really become a major factor in those fights.
It really could. Yeah, it's almost like like Denninger is offering this roadmap for more assertive federal government.
Yeah.
One that's willing to kind of use all the tools at its disposal to push back against what it sees as state overreach.
Exactly. And whether you agree with that approach or not, you have to admit it's a pretty powerful strategy.
It is. Yeah. It's a potential game changer for sure.
It really could. It could fundamentally shift that balance of power between the feds and the states.
This whole deep dive has really I don't know, it's just made me realize that there's so much I don't know about the law.
Yeah.
And how it really affects everything.
Well, that's the beauty of it, right?
It is, yeah.
There's always more to learn, Always more to analyze, more to debate.
Right.
And that's really what we hope you'll take away from this episode.
I like that.
You know, we're not just trying to give you answers.
Right.
We're trying to spark your curiosity, encourage you to dig a little deeper.
Absolutely.
And then ultimately to form your own informed opinions.
So well said. Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
okay,
I want to leave you with this one final thought.
Right.
Think about the potential ripple effects of this legal tactic.
Yeah.
How could this impact future political and legal battles?
Mm-hmm.
How might it change the relationship between the federal government and the states?
Yeah.
And most importantly, how do you feel about all of this?
It's a question worth thinking about.
It really is.
Because the answers could have a huge impact on the future of our country.
Well, on that note, thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep those minds curious and engaged.